Okay, good afternoon. We're glad to be here. Three of my colleagues, Senators Murray, Wyden, and Hassan. Now, this afternoon, the Senate will vote on a cloture petition on the nomination of Chad Radler to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. For 2 years, we've seen nothing but hard-right, unqualified nominees to the bench from President Trump, rushed through without a care by Leader McConnell and Senate Republicans. But even among this group, Radler stands out. Radler was the lead lawyer behind the Trump administration's decision to side with Texas and 19 other states in their politically motivated lawsuit to strike down our health care law. Radler was the lead lawyer from Justice saying people should no longer be protected when they had pre-existing conditions. Our Republican colleagues get out there on the floor and say, oh, we want to keep pre-existing conditions, protections for them. This vote will be their test. It would be the height of hypocrisy, to say you want to keep the protections for pre-existing conditions and then vote for the chief cook and bottle washer to get rid of them. And imagine this, you can't even make this up. The day after he filed his petition, the day after, he was nominated to the Sixth Circuit for a lifetime appointment. Apparently in the Trump administration, depriving people of protections for pre-existing conditions is something to be rewarded, and rewarded no less with a lifetime appointment. All 47 Democrats vehemently disagree. We're united against Mr. Radler's nomination. We won't support someone who led the charge to repeal pre-existing condition protections and take away health care from millions. Now, our Republican friends who surprisingly stood up last year during their election campaigns and proclaimed they too support pre-existing condition protections have the opportunity to stand up and vote. And we're watching. America's watching. Tens of millions of Americans who need this protection are watching. A vote for Radler is very simply a vote for the lawsuit to strike down our health care law. Now, one other topic very quickly. The President's national emergency. We now know that a bipartisan resolution to terminate the President's national emergency has enough votes to pass the Senate. So I'd say this to all of my colleagues, particularly those on the Republican side. No matter what you think about the President's policy at the southern border, no president, none, should be allowed to discard the Constitution at a whim and do an end run around a co-equal branch of government. The bottom line is this. The Founding Fathers' exquisite balance of power is now being attempted to be undone by President Trump. Members of both parties should come together and say no. It seems we have enough votes to pass this resolution of disapproval, but why don't our Republican colleagues vote with their conscience and give us enough to override a presidential veto? Senator Murray.
Well, thank you. You know, for months now, my Republican colleagues have claimed they care about protections for people with pre-existing conditions. They've made these claims despite their repeated attempts to undermine these protections by jamming Trump care through Congress, despite supporting Trump's junk plans rule that could price people with pre-existing conditions out of the market, and even despite supporting a lawsuit designed to increase costs and take protections for pre-existing conditions away. Republicans have claimed time and again they're going to fight for families' health care, for protections that help those most in need of affordable health care coverage. So far, they have not once. But now, they have another chance to prove it by voting against Chad Radler, President Trump's right-hand man, for health care sabotage. Radler isn't just a loyal foot soldier in President Trump's fight to end protections for people with pre-existing conditions. He is leading the charge. When President Trump's Department of Justice announced it was abandoning protections for people with pre-existing conditions in court, 3 department officials withdrew their names from the brief One of the officials, who'd been there for over 20 years, even resigned. Raidler, on the other hand, fell right in line. He led the Trump administration's argument in favor of the lawsuit to strike down protections for pre-existing conditions, an argument one of my Republican colleagues actually called, quote, as far-fetched as any I've ever heard. It is far-fetched. In fact, I'd say the only thing more far-fetched than Raidler's backward argument for striking down protections for people with pre-existing conditions and increasing costs and jeopardizing care for millions of people in our country is the idea that any Republican who votes to confirm him as a judge is serious about protections for pre-existing conditions or helping families get more affordable health care. This is really a straightforward test. A vote for Raidler is a vote against protections for pre-existing conditions, higher health care costs for patients, and against families' health care. People across the country are going to be watching this vote closely to see if Republicans mean what they've been saying, or if they're going to break their word and vote again for President Trump's agenda of chaos and health care sabotage. I really do hope they change their course and keep their word this time. I hope they join us and people across the country in opposing Raidler's nomination. Thank you.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. And this nominee, Chad Raidler, shows that Republicans have an inexhaustible supply of pretenders, people who say that they will preserve protections for pre-existing conditions and then vote to take them away. You can almost set your clock by it. Day after day after day, this administration tries to advance individuals who come forward with the most vigorous pledge that they will be for protecting the most vulnerable, those with pre-existing health conditions like asthma, diabetes, pre-existing conditions, and then virtually overnight, they do an about-face and take a very different position. And as we have indicated, this is the Trump administration's point man in the fight to unravel protections for those who need to be able to go to bed at night knowing they won't wake up in the morning and be discriminated against if they have a pre-existing condition. He was the face of the Trump administration's legal brief in support of the Texas versus U.S. lawsuit, where he was arguing, in effect, that the only part of the Affordable Care Act that ought to be struck down is the part involving the crucial pre-existing condition protections. And the White House nominated Mr. Raidler for this position on the very day he filed the Texas legal brief for the Justice Department. I've seen some chutzpah in my time in public service, but this one really sets a new standard for chutzpah. Finally, I want to wrap up with two quick points. What we need to know, what the American people know, is that this is not an abstract question. If Mr. Raidler has his way, America starts marching back to the days when health care was for the healthy and the wealthy. That's what you have if you unravel these protections. If you're healthy, you have nothing to worry about. If you're wealthy, you can pay for the services. That's where America would be headed if Mr. Raidler has his way. Finally, the Senate does have a track record of stepping up in the face of flawed nominees. The Oregon senators are very proud to have led the fight against Ryan Bounds, another extreme nominee who really clouded some of his positions, like Mr. Raidler. This is a vote that matters to Americans around their kitchen table who are counting on having these protections. Let's not turn back the clock to the days when health care was for the healthy and wealthy. We're going to do everything we possibly can to defeat this very flawed nominee.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. Last but certainly not least, Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Senator Schumer, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. As my colleagues have outlined, it couldn't be clearer that a vote for Mr. Radler is a vote to undermine health care for millions of Americans. It's a vote to gut protections for people with pre-existing conditions. It's a vote to cause million more Americans to go uninsured. And it is a vote to hurt our efforts to combat the opioid crisis. Each of these impacts would be devastating for people in New Hampshire and all across the country. But I want to focus for a minute on what this partisan lawsuit that Mr. Radler endorsed one day before the president nominated him to the bench, what it would mean for our efforts to combat the opioid crisis. This lawsuit would end Medicaid expansion and the requirement that insurance companies provide coverage for substance use disorder treatment. Those on the front lines working to combat the devastating opioid crisis have made clear that Medicaid expansion is the #1 tool they have to help people get treatment. Pulling the rug out from those in the throes of addiction would be unconscionable. We've taken some really important steps to strengthen our response to the opioid crisis over the past 2 years, including providing billions of dollars in additional funding and getting the Bipartisan Support Act signed into law. We cannot afford to take one step forward on those efforts and 2 steps backward, which is exactly what will happen if this partisan lawsuit that Mr. Radler spearheaded would succeed. In the summer of 2017, thousands of Americans came here to this building to be heard about the importance of health care to them, to their families. Since that time, voters in states that are both Republican and Democrat voted on referenda to authorize Medicaid expansion in their states. Medicaid expansion possible only because the Affordable Care Act exists. And what the Republicans are doing in nominating Mr. Radler is essentially saying to those millions of Americans who support Medicaid expansion, whose lives have been changed by Medicaid expansion, who are getting substance use treatment because of Medicaid expansion, who voted for Medicaid expansion when their state leadership would not. The Republicans are saying your voice doesn't matter and your health care doesn't matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. I promised you last event.
Thank you. Have you been given any assurances that you will be notified when Mueller concludes his investigation?
No. We have not been given notification, assurances of notification. Mr. Barr has said that he will look at the report. He hasn't given us any assurances that we'll see the whole report. So to me, there are 2 issues that are the most important. Number one, that there be no interference in Mr. Mueller's investigation. Whatever direction he wants to take it in, he should be able. And second, that the full report is made public. There may have to be a few redactions to protect intelligence sources, but that's it. It should be made public. We've gotten no assurances of either.
What's the Democrats' response in case that doesn't happen?
Well, we're going to have to figure that out, but we'll have to do something. Yes.
Just before you came up here, several Republican senators got up here and said that the Green New Deal would cost an average American household $60,000 a year per year. I assume you would disagree with that, but I want to ask a broader question about the rollout of this. Are you comfortable with the rollout of the Green New Deal?
Well, let me say this.
And secondly, are you comfortable with a first-term House member becoming the point person on this?
Well, look, the bottom line is very simple. We Democrats believe very strongly that we have to do something about climate change. There are different views as to what we should do, but we're united in the fact that we should do something. We have repeatedly asked our Republican colleagues 3 questions, not to say what they're not for, but what are they for? Number 1, Leader McConnell and every Republican senator, answer, do you believe climate change is real? Mr. McConnell and every Republican senator, please answer, do you believe it's caused by human activity? And Mr. McConnell and every Republican in the Senate, please answer, do you believe the Congress should take immediate action to deal with it? We've had silence on that, silence. And so it shows you, once again, they can do their stunts, but we're on offense here. We're showing that they cannot even bring themselves to say climate change is real, and we Democrats will be doing lots of things in climate change. Just today, we've introduced a resolution or a proposal to defund the fake commission that the President has put together, and you'll be hearing a lot from us on the issue of climate change. Yes.
Mr. Schumer, the House is voting on a resolution to condemn anti-Semitism. Do you think the Senate should take a similar vote, and do you think Democrats have done enough to defend Congresswoman Omar when she's been the target of anti-Muslim sentiment?
Well, let me say two things. One, I think every senator would condemn anti-Semitism. That's absolutely true. And I think that the bottom line is this, that Congresswoman Omar said, I thought was wrong and hurtful, but I also want to say that what happened linking all Muslims to the terrorist attack was wrong and hurtful, and both should be condemned.
To that end, though, are you concerned, though, as Senator McConnell said, that there is a rise in anti-Semitism in the country, and he pinned it specifically on members of the House Democratic class?
Okay. Why doesn't Senator McConnell talk about the people in the march in Sharpsville who marched on a synagogue and chanted, "Burn it down," and then Donald Trump said both sides are to blame? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Oh, sorry.
Amy McGrath, any update on her? Has she indicated that she is going to, per your suggestion, run against Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell?
No update. Thank you, everybody.